Please be seated. They only heard it said, "The one who formerly was persecuting us is now proclaiming the faith he once tried to destroy. And they glorify God because of me." God makes the impossible possible. Today we celebrate the conversion of St. Paul. We reflect on how Paul went from persecutor of those who followed Jesus to a proclaimer of the good news of Jesus Christ. And not only did he become a proclaimer of the gospel, but he did so to the Gentiles, the very people that he believed were unclean and impure. Paul's story is the continuation of God's work in creation, of making a way where there seems to be no way. God makes the impossible possible. In the book of Acts, where Paul's second autobiography is contained, Paul recounts his experience on the road to Damascus. He says he saw a blinding light, heard Jesus' voice, and was blinded for 3 days. He was rendered completely helpless. And it was then when Paul was rendered helpless that he tells of his conversion experience happening and being called through God's grace. It was only when Paul was in a complete state of surrender that he was willing to walk through the door that God had opened. Paul had to be blinded so that God could reveal to him the things in his life that needed to die. Beginning with his unwavering belief that he knew everything about God, which we heard about in today's Galatians reading. It was in this dance of God's invitation and Paul's response that Paul experienced despair and death so that new life could be born. It was in the depths of despair that Paul was able to experience freedom, and Paul's life became Christ-like. And check this out. When Paul experienced the revelation of God's grace, Paul revealed God's grace to be revealed not only to him. So not only did God reveal it to him, but in and through him. God makes the impossible possible. So, all we must do is surrender and let some things die. I have written, laughter and or squirming in your seat are both appropriate. This surrendering and letting things die is not easy. It wasn't easy for Paul. I have some experience with this. For those of you who are friends with me on social media, you may have seen this past Saturday, I celebrated 15 years in recovery from addiction to alcohol. It's been one of the hardest and most beautiful things that's ever happened to me. It's why I'm standing here today. Like Paul, I had to be put in a complete state of surrender. I had to be blinded so that I could see what was blinding me. When I share my story about what happened, I always say, I cannot explain what happened, but I know without a shadow of a doubt that on January 22nd, 2007, a moment of God's grace and my willingness collided. since then I have not had to take a drink. In that moment, I surrendered and I let some things die. And it was really painful. And even though here I am 15 years later, I still resist surrendering today. It's hard. It's hard to let the things die that need to die. But here's like the super cool thing. Once I'm willing to let go and surrender, something new is always born. And many times, these words might sound familiar to you. It's more than I could ever have asked for or imagined. Surrendering and letting something die, it's a continuous process. And one that I've found is much easier to do alongside others. Others who may be drastically different than me in every other way other than, like me, they're just trying to stay sober one day at a time. I'd like to believe that this was pulled from Paul's ministry, which was dedicated to this very thing, bringing those together who may have had very different customs and practices and beliefs, yet were held together by their love of Jesus and their desire to walk in love and into a new way of being. God makes the impossible possible. So as we celebrate Paul today, what if, for a moment, we were all just to sit quietly and think about, what is that one thing that I think God can't change? Maybe it's a broken relationship. Maybe it's something with your job. Maybe it's something related to the world. If there's something that you're holding on to that you believe is impossible, bring it to God and ask Him to make it possible. Think about how our lives, our neighborhoods, our churches could be brought into a new way of living and believing. As we remember Paul's conversion, we're reminded that the invitation to the Christian life is an ongoing and everlasting invitation to surrender, to let go, and to let things die. Because when we do this, it's all in the name of making a place for something new to be born. We're reminded that through Jesus Christ, God overcame death by resurrecting new life. And through Paul, God converted a persecutor to a proclaimer. They only heard it said, the one who formerly was persecuting us is now proclaiming the faith he once tried to destroy. And they glorified God because of him. God makes the impossible possible. Amen. Amen. Amen.